Most axes are magical. Just think that you're going to take a piece of stone and you're going to cut a tree down with it. Well, that's what they did. Now, in order to make that, they had to come up with a few things. First of all, they had to get some diorite granite, which is a very fine-grained granite. You see it in the creeks around here, down in our area, down near Fairview Heights. And that stone is pretty common in the local creeks. And then along with it, you'll find pieces of flint or chert. And those are things they made arrowheads out of and different tools, and I'll show you some of those. But that is found in the same creeks. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. But for making axes, you can use almost any kind of it. And you take the flint and you beat on the stone axe. It gets kind of noisy. And you have to do this for about 7 or 8 hours. This axe here I've got maybe 4 hours in, and I've got 7 or 8 more to go before I'm going to have it finished. When I get done shaping it completely, then I'll grind it on a sandstone slab with some water. And I'll usually take about 50 strokes, and then I'll take a breather, and then I'll take 50 strokes. And it'll take about 3 more hours to grind the edge on it. And once I get done, then I'll have a stone axe that I can use to cut down a tree. Now, the earliest axes were full grooved axes. I don't have one of those. I'm working on one right now. But a full grooved axe has a groove that goes all the way around the stone. And that groove helps haft it on, hold it. So you have to lash it on like with these lashings. The problem with those is they were used about 7,000 or 8,000 BC. So, and for a couple thousand years after that. As you use them, about a half hour after you get into cutting the tree with it, it starts to get loose in the handle. And the only way you could tighten those back up was by unwrapping the whole handle and then rewrapping it again and then chopping some more with it. So they used those for about 3,000 years, and then they invented a thing called the 3/4 grooved axe, which is what this one is. And this has this flat spot back here. And the reason it has the flat spot is you can put a wedge in there. And when you're chopping with it, and it gets loose, then you can go ahead and tighten that wedge up, and it'll make it nice and tight again. So they used those for about another 4,000 years. And then they invented a thing called the celt. And the celt is an ungrooved axe that's wedged into the handle. And you can see that this axe doesn't come loose. In fact, the more you chop with it, the more seated it becomes in the handle. The problem is that if you put the axe in backwards, you can split your handle. And I found out the first year I broke 7 handles. So I needed to find out a way to fix this. So what I'm talking about is experimental archaeology. We'll take things that we find in the field, like a stone axe, and then we'll make one look like it, and we'll put it in a handle, and then we'll use it to see what we can learn from it. And you can learn a lot of different things. If you see this piece of seasoned hickory, this is 30 seconds of cutting with a stone axe. And this is in a very hard piece of wood. And you can cut cross grain with a stone axe, but with an edge, you'll cut with the grain. So in instances where you want to make, let's say you want to make a dugout canoe, you don't want to chop every ½ inch all the way down the log. What you'll do is chop a notch here and chop a notch there, and then you'll take out the axe. So I'm going to put it on the floor, hit it over the log, and you can take this out. And then you can use this as a wedge. You could use the axe down in a canoe or on a regular log, but when you're down in a canoe, you got to have something smaller, and then you can take a wooden mallet and hit it with that. Now, one of the things we learned is that I broke those 7 handles that first year, so that wasn't a very good hafting method. We were trying to figure out why were they breaking. And that was because I was doing demonstrations like this, and I would drive the axe head out, and I would put it in backwards. And then when I'd hit it the next time, it would split the handle open. So we found a thing that we saw in archaeological newsletters and things, and journals that show a little notch up here in the front. We always wondered what they were for. Well, we realized that now they're for axes that are nice and even on both sides, and it's hard to tell which is the front or back. So you take a little notch and put it up here in the front, and you feel it with your fingernail. And when you put it back in, you always put it in the right way each time. And that's what that little tally mark is on the end of this. Now you notice too that this tool had 2 functions. It was an axe and it was also a wedge. And you're going to see that other tools that the Indians used are used the same way. They have 2 functions at least. And a lot of those functions work off of one another. Now we also have, I'm going to take you back a real long way now. We're going to go back about 14,000 years. And we're going to get back to when they're hunting mastodons and mammoths and shark-faced bear and camel and horse and sloth and giant bison and giant elk. All the animals back there were about 3 times bigger than the animals we have today. A mastodon was 3 times bigger than the biggest African elephant you've ever seen. So these are some pretty good size animals. And so they had to have a special technology to take those. In fact, they had to get a couple technologies to go together at the same time in order to take those animals. And the first one is the Clovis point. The Clovis point was used to take these big animals that weighed 10 tons. And the neat thing about the Clovis, there are two things actually. The first thing is that it's wider at this point than it is at the bottom. And that's so when the cut is made through the meat, it follows on through. Now, you got to realize, too, that this isn't like today where we go to the refrigerator and take out a pound of hamburger. Back then, you had to kill a big animal. You had to butcher that animal, make it into bite-sized chunks, and cook it. So you had to know a lot of different skills in order to be able to do that. Now, one of the other things with the Clovis point that's really unique is that on both sides, there are flakes taken off after the point is made, and those are made to hide the hafting. So if you take a regular spear point, like this one, that would take a white-tailed deer, a white-tailed deer has a skin that's 1/8 of an inch thick. A mastodon or mammoth has a skin that's a foot thick, and then the last 1.5 inches is about the consistency of a rhinoceros hide. So very, very tough. And you can imagine throwing this point that would go right through a white-tailed deer. You can see where it's going to hang up on a mastodon or mammoth. It's not going to penetrate because all the lashings are here. So that's why they made the Clovis point, so that when you put the two together, you can get a very thin profile that allows for the penetration. Now, even though we have this, and we know that this will cut very well, we really don't know that it will go into an animal like a mastodon or a mammoth. And the biggest thing we have that comes close to that is an elephant. So we had to do some experiments. And we found Dr. Dennis Stanford at the Smithsonian did a neat experiment first. And he went to the University of Washington, and he did some experiments with a thing called the atlatl and the spear. And an atlatl and spear are just simply a throwing stick. This is the atlatl, ATL, ATL. It hooks in the end of your spear, and when you throw your spear, it goes 3 times farther. So if I was to throw this spear, I'd be lucky to hit the back of the hallway, but if I threw this spear with the atlatl, I could hit the building across the street. Now we thought, okay, so what, you can throw 3 times farther, it's going to hit with 3 times more impact, big deal. That's not going to take a big animal like that. Well, Dr. Stanford, he proved us wrong. And he did this experiment where they hooked up a computer to a target, and they threw a bunch of spears in their hand, and then they threw a bunch of spears with the spear thrower, and found out it didn't hit with 3 times more power. It hit with 250 to 300 times more power than when you throw it in your hand. So now this was, okay, this can work. When you got that much power, you can penetrate an animal like that, but we needed to prove it. And so Dr. Friesen from the University of Wyoming had a chance about 7 or 8 years ago, and he was able to go over to Africa. And the African elephants in this one area had overpopulated and were eating all the acacia trees, and so they had to come in and thin the herds. And they would herd 20 elephants into a herd, and they'd shoot them. The big game hunters would come in and shoot them. And this gave him a chance to go in and do penetration experiments. And by using the atlatl, he was able to throw the spears into the animals that far. And now we know that it will take these animals, because that shot will get into the harder lungs. So now, through these experiments, this is also experimental archaeology, through these experiments, we're finding out that the things that we thought could happen can happen simply from working with it. Now, on a spear, just like that one that he took the elephants with, he found out it had another use. And what he did is he took the foreshaft off with the point in it and butchered the elephant with this. So he had his butcher knife with him, still hooked onto his spear. By the way, you can watch for this spear in What Killed the Mega Beast. It's going to be on PBS on August 19th. They're going to take my spears and throw them into a computer-generated mammoth, so you might want to watch for that. I think it's going to look real cool, so we'll see. Okay, so